So you want to make a zine and fill it with some rad artwork. In this video, I'm going to show you how. I want to inspire you to make your own artwork, even if you feel like you can't. I'm going to give you some technical knowledge so you make sure your artwork prints perfectly, and I'm going to show you my own process of how I illustrate my zines. This is part 3 of my series on how to make your own zines, and I want to start off this video by encouraging you to make your own images for your zines. I already know if you're willing to put in the effort of making your own zine, you aren't messing around with any AI art, robbing yourself of the awesome experience of creating your own images. And at the same time, I hope you know you don't have to be some professional artist to have some cool images in your zines either. You can make art by hand and photograph it or scan it in the computer, or you can make art digitally on an iPad or in Photoshop. You can make simple black and white illustrations. You can make 2-color illustrations or full color drawings. You can do pencil drawings or ink wash drawings or marker drawings, whatever medium you want. And you can make art in any style you want. It can be cartoony and fun, or serious and grimdark, or somewhere stylized in between. You can make pixel art or abstract illustrations. If you aren't confident in drawing, which you should absolutely try it out, by the way, it's so rewarding, and I have lots of videos on this channel showing you how. But if you aren't ready to do your own illustrations, you can use public domain artwork, or make your own collages, or even manipulate your own photos. I know this isn't a zine example, but I love how the images in this Deathmatch Island game are just photos with some text mocked up on top. There are also tons of artists and illustrators out there who offer stock art that you can use for your own zines. I'll have a bunch of those resources linked in the description for you to check out if you're looking for cool ways to use real art by real people. Now, before we move on to the technical stuff, I want to show you some examples of some attainable ways of illustrating your own zines. You know, adding your own images doesn't have to be complicated, and it can really elevate the look and feel of your zine. So here are some fun examples. This is a game called Outliers. It's about working in a crazy science lab, and you can see the images are just simple, like almost iconic, with some texture and fun little absurd doodles on top. Really simple, but really fit the vibe of the game. Then there's this Thrifty Trades of Fae zine that is a collection of 64 Fae magic items. Some of the items are illustrated, but mostly it's just these simple, scratchy illustrations of the shelves inside the shop. Really cool way of bringing in some in-world flavor to the design and layout of the zine. There's also this Night Forlorn zine. It's very Dark Souls inspired, and you can see that all of the images have this sort of dream-like ethereal quality. I can't tell exactly how they're made, but it's almost like some photo reference was used and then digitally painted or manipulated. They are simple, but convey so much emotion, and it really matches the feel of the game. And of course, I have to show off one of my all-time favorite little zines. I have this little comic on my shelf at all times. This is The Monster That Ate the Stars by Souther Salazar. It's about this kid who's bored and goes crazy and eats all the stars in the sky. It's just messy little black and white drawings that totally look like a crazy kid made them, and it's so perfect and charming. My point is, with all these examples, with zines, the stakes are low, so you can get creative and make images that fit the vibe and the type of zine that you're trying to make. But it doesn't have to be this masterful, full-color fantasy oil painting to be rad as hell, you know? Okay, let's get into the technical stuff to make sure whatever kind of images you make look good when they're printed. Don't worry, it's not that complicated. Really, you only need to be aware of 3 things. There's the resolution of your image, the size, and the color mode. It doesn't matter if you're scanning your images in, taking a photo, or creating your artwork digitally. All you have to do is make sure your images have the right resolution, they're at the right scale, and are in the right color format. Okay, let's start with resolution. Think of this like how much detail is contained in the image. You know, the higher the resolution, the more detailed. So Resolution is measured in DPI, or dots per inch. Basically, you're like telling the computer how many little dots or pixels make up the entire image. So on the low end, think of it like an old pixel art video game. So Mario is made in this 16 by 16 grid of pixels. So you could say that Mario's DPI is 16. And then on the high end, you have stuff like NASA space photography, where tiny objects that are too far away for our eyes to see get captured in a really, really high resolution. The weird thing is, like, the faraway stars still look kind of like blurry little dots, but think of it more like a high resolution photo of the moon. You know, when you look up at the full moon with just your eyes, you can see a little bit of the texture, but some of the photos from Earth can capture like crazy details of the moon's surface. But we're making zines. We're not taking space photography, unless you're making a zine about space photography, but all of these rules still apply. So when we're printing a zine, there's a cap to that resolution based on the printer you're using. So you can set up an image file to have 1,000,000 DPI resolution, like the photo of some distant star, but when you print it, the printer's gonna print the image at its maximum resolution. So the safe number for a grayscale or a color image, we'll talk about color mode in a minute here, the safe number is 300 DPI. When I'm creating a new image on the computer, that's the resolution I make all of my artwork, and I know it should print really crisp and nice looking. You can always go higher, but 300 DPI is generally safe and will make it so your files aren't totally huge. Now this is really important and something you gotta watch out for, especially if you're using photos or images that are like already on the internet. Maybe it was an image you used in the past, you didn't think you were gonna print it out, and you're just making it to post on the internet somewhere. You gotta be really, really careful, because just like how most printers are printing at 300 DPI, most screens, basically all screens, whether it's a computer monitor or your phone or tablet, they're displaying at only 72 DPI. And that means a lot of the images that are saved on the internet, never intended to be printed, are saved at 72 DPI. This keeps that file size down. But it also means that if you print the image, it's gonna look crappy and pixelated. And that's because the printer is still printing at 300 DPI and has to fill up the remaining 228 dots per inch itself. And usually that just means it scales the image up, and so you get all those horrible, jagged, pixelated lines. And we don't want that. We want to be in control of how our images look. So remember, if there's anything you learn from this video, 300 DPI. Okay, the next thing we gotta know is the size of your zine. So we already talked about how a zine is usually a piece of paper folded in half and stapled to create multiple pages. And if you're following along with this video series and you've done the layout step, that means you've already decided on what size your paper you're going to be printing your zine on. And that means we already have the size of our zine figured out. So I print my zines at digest or letter size, which means it's an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper folded in half. So I know a single page in my zine is going to be 5.5 inches by 8.5 inches. And that means I know as long as my images are at least that size, at least 300 DPI, they're gonna look good when they're printed. And when I'm drawing on the computer, it's easy for me to create a new document and have the resolution and the size just right. I'll actually show you my process for that in a minute, but let's say you're using a photo you took for your artwork. How do you make sure that that image that already exists will be the right size and also print nicely? So the bad news, there's not a lot you can do if your image is 72 DPI and the size is too small. You have to figure out a way to remake the image. But let's say it's 72 DPI and the size is super big. So for example, here's an iPhone photo of my dog Ollie taking a nap with a pair of my socks. This makes me think that I should make a zine about my dog. Anyway, if we open this image in Affinity Pixel and go to Document Setup, you can see that it's 72 DPI, but it's also 42 by 56 inches, which is crazy huge. Now here's the cool thing. Remember how DPI stands for dots per inch? That means that the resolution is interconnected with the size of the image. So if we change the DPI to 300 and then click on the size, Affinity will automatically update the width and height from 42 by 56 down to 10 by 13 inches. Now we've changed the resolution of the image to 300 DPI, but we also know that it's definitely bigger than a 5.5 by 8.5 size page. So this image is going to be just fine. It's going to be safe to print. Okay, the last thing we need to pay attention to is the color format or the color mode. Whatever program you're using, they all name it something different. Basically, you're looking for like grayscale, RGB, CMYK. Those are the main three. And you'll see that my photo of Ollie is in RGB mode, which is the standard like screen color format. So your TV, your phone, your tablets all display color through little red, green, and blue dots. Now, if you want just the quick rule of thumb for printing color, go ahead and select CMYK, but I want to give you a little bit more context so you can understand what these color modes are, actually make an intelligent decision on which one you choose for your zine. Most books on your shelf, color books, are printed in CMYK. It's a process called offset printing that uses a combination of like semi-transparent cyan, magenta, yellow, and black ink that all combined and overlap to what appears to be a full color image. But the CMYK color mode is more limited than the RGB color mode. Like there are literally some colors, especially bright greens and purples, that just aren't achievable in CMYK that are in RGB. You know, monitors can display it, but it's literally impossible to print certain colors in CMYK. So I've got an example piece of artwork open here in Photoshop, and I'm just using the eyedropper tool to look at the colors. And you can tell if I have selected a safe CMYK color as long as it doesn't have this little warning sign here in the color picker. I actually don't know how to see this in Affinity, so let us know down in the comments if you know. I just want to make sure that when I'm coloring my artwork, I'm picking CMYK's safe colors, because if you color something up in RGB and then change it to CMYK, you're gonna see a lot of those really bright colors get dulled down, and you're basically letting the computer decide what colors to color your artwork when you change the mode. So try and pick your color mode up front and pay attention to what colors you're using in your artwork. So in the best possible scenario, you wanna pick your color mode up front and make sure you're using those CMYK safe colors to get the best possible print. So hopefully all of this information helps you decide what color mode you should be using. If you're printing in full color and want to be really safe, just work in CMYK. But if you're just printing a black and white zine, you don't have to worry about any of this, and you can select grayscale for your color mode and you're good to go. Okay, so that was a lot of technical talk. Now I want to show you exactly how I make my illustrations and get them into the zine layout. Now, is my method the best way? Probably not. It's kind of finicky, and I know that I always have more to learn, but this is the way I've found to be the fastest and most effective for making sure that my illustrations fit perfectly into the layout that I've created so I can produce a new zine every month. In the last video, I showed you how to do layout in Affinity. Now, I usually work in Adobe InDesign. I don't really recommend InDesign. Use Affinity if you're starting from scratch. They do all the same things. All the principles are the same, and this part of my process would be the same if I had done my layout in Affinity. Really, all I'm doing is taking a screenshot of the page spread of, the layout with all the text figured out on the 2 pages. Then I open up a Photoshop file that has the exact same dimensions as my zine. So like I mentioned earlier and in the layout video, my zines are letter size, so it's a piece of 8.5 by 11 paper folded in half. And I've also added a 0.125 inch bleed around the outside edges. So my file size is 8.75 by 11.25 inches. 300 DPI resolution. I just paste the screenshot of my 2-page spread layout into the Photoshop file, resize it to line it up so the edges of the screenshot are the correct size, and then I reduce the opacity of that layer so it's barely visible, just enough so I can see where the text blocks are. Then I'm just making new layers on top where I draw my illustrations in the negative space, fill up the negative space of the layout with the drawing. I'm using an XP Pen Artist Ultra 16 pen display. It's like drawing directly onto a monitor with a stylus that feels like using a pencil. Pretty cool. Basically like drawing on an iPad with an Apple Pencil. And I use a bunch of custom-made Photoshop brushes that are just hacked up versions of the awesome brushes made by Kyle Webster that are included in Photoshop. I also use a bunch of True Grit brushes. I'll put links to all that stuff in the description if you're interested in drawing in Photoshop and want some cool custom brushes. My actual drawing process is very iterative, so I like to do a sketch layer to plan out the illustration first, keep it simple, like not all detailed and everything. Sometimes I'll even snap a photo of a pencil sketch on paper and then paste that onto its own layer. Again, reduce the opacity down. Then I make a new layer on top of it that I ink in quotations here, because it's really just drawing with the same brush, but making a more finalized solid black line. Once the line art's done, then I'll add another layer, but I'll put it underneath the line art layer and fill that with color, making sure to use my color palette so all the colors are like CMYK safe. And then sometimes I'll even add some texture layers on top of the illustration to give it an even more gritty or paper-like feel. And once all the artwork is done, I hide all of those layers that are my sketches and the screenshot from the layout. I turn those layers invisible, so it's just the nice, clean artwork. I save the Photoshop file, then go back into the layout and just drop the image in. And because the Photoshop file is the same size as my layout, there's no scaling that needs to happen. And I just line it up with the edges so it fits in perfectly. The artwork goes underneath all of the text blocks and it just lines up. I guess sometimes I do have to adjust the type a little bit to get everything spaced out and looking good. But the cool thing is, anytime I need to make a change to the artwork, I just fix it in the Photoshop file in Photoshop, save it, and then it'll automatically update in InDesign. Pretty awesome. Okay, hopefully this video has got you inspired to create artwork for your zine and given you an understanding of some of the technical sides of making artwork for print. There's one more video in this series all about the actual printing and distribution of your zines. That's coming soon, so stay tuned for that. Please let me know if you have any questions down in the comments, and if you'd like to support this channel and get some of my tabletop role-playing game zines. I make a new one every month on my Patreon, and I have an online shop filled with them. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya!